My name is Margaret Collins. And the night everything changed started at a dinner table that looked like it belonged in a magazine. The chandelier above us threw light over polished glasses and plates, so perfect they almost looked untouched. I sat near the end of the table, my hands folded neatly in my lap, trying to ignore the hollow space in my chest. It was supposed to be a celebration, my son, Daniel's engagement, but it felt more like a performance I didn't belong in. I could feel the air shift before it happened. The sound of laughter around me dulled. And then came the sting, sharp, clean, unforgettable. My son's words, his comparison, the way he used me as proof of what he'd outgrown. For a moment, I thought I might crumble right there, disappear between the silver and glass. But instead, something inside me settled. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt the years of sacrifice rise quietly in my chest, like a tide I could no longer hold back. So I told the truth, the one thing no one in that shining room expected to hear. It cut through the noise like broken glass against marble. And then, there was silence. Heavy. Complete. The kind that doesn't end right away but hangs in the air. Trembling, I remember gripping the edge of my chair, the world still spinning in slow motion, and realizing that this moment didn't begin here, it began years before. And to understand how I got to that table, I need to start from the very beginning. When I think back on my life, it doesn't start with that dinner table or the silence that followed. It starts in a small apartment in Queens, with the smell of instant coffee and the sound of my son's laughter echoing through chipped walls. My name is Margaret Collins. Most people just call me Maggie, and for more than 60 years, I've lived an ordinary life filled with small struggles and quiet victories. I wasn't born into comfort. I worked where I could, cleaning offices at night, waiting tables on weekends, doing whatever it took to keep a roof over our heads after Daniel's father walked out when he was barely 2. There were nights I'd sit on the edge of my bed, sewing up his torn school uniform, too tired to cry, too proud to stop. Every dollar had to stretch twice as far. And somehow, it did. I remember boiling pasta with butter and salt when that was all we had. I remember the way Daniel's little hand would slip into mine, his fingers sticky with peanut butter, and how he'd say, I was his favorite person in the world. Those words used to be enough to erase every ache in my bones. He was always bright, curious, determined, the kind of boy who made teachers smile. I told myself that if I just worked harder, if I gave him every chance I never had, he'd grow into a life untouched by struggle. And he did. Scholarships, honors, business school, the kind of success people write about. I still remember sitting in the crowd at his graduation, my heart full to bursting. I thought every sleepless night, every second job, had finally meant something. But somewhere between the man he became and the mother I remained, something changed. The calls came less often. His voice grew distant, careful, polished. He started talking about image, about how things looked. I told myself it was just ambition. I wanted to believe we were still a team. But pride can be a quiet wall, and love doesn't always climb over it. Looking back, I see how far apart we had already drifted. I used to think his success was my greatest accomplishment. I didn't realize it was also the start of my biggest heartbreak. It was a Tuesday evening when Daniel showed up at my apartment in Queens. I hadn't seen him in months, though his voice still lived in my phone through rushed calls that always ended with, "Sorry, Mom, I've got to run." That night, he looked different. Sharp suit, polished shoes, the scent of cologne that didn't belong in my tiny living room. He stood there like a guest instead of a son, holding his coat instead of hanging it up. I remember offering him coffee out of habit, the way I used to when he'd come home late from studying. But he waved it off with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was something rehearsed about him, like every movement had been practiced in front of a mirror. I tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. That strange mix of pride and distance that always crept in when I saw him now. He started talking about his girlfriend. Jessica. The name had come up a few times before, always spoken with reverence. Like she was a doorway into the world he'd been chasing. That night, though, the way he spoke was different. Controlled. Careful. I could tell he was building up to something. And then he asked me not to talk about our past when I met her. Not to mention the old apartment. Or the nights we couldn't afford heat. Or the years I juggled 3 jobs. He wanted to pretend those years never happened. My throat tightened as he said it, not because of the request itself, but because of what it meant. My son. The boy who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after homework. Was ashamed of me. I sat there, nodding slowly, trying to keep my hands from trembling. I told myself he didn't mean it the way it sounded, that maybe he just wanted to make a good impression. But inside, something cracked. I thought of the nights I'd walked home in the rain after the diner closed. Too exhausted to even take off my shoes. The mornings I'd braid his hair before school while pretending not to worry about the bills stacked by the sink. Every sacrifice, every ounce of strength, had built the man standing in front of me. And yet, he couldn't see it. Or maybe he didn't want to. When he left that night, the apartment felt unbearably quiet. I sat on the couch long after the door closed, staring at the dent in the cushion where he used to curl up as a boy. The smell of his cologne lingered, a reminder that he'd grown up in a way, leaving behind the version of himself that once needed me. I realized then that shame can build walls thicker than distance. He wasn't just moving up in life, he was moving away from everything that made him who he was. The past he wanted to bury was the very past that built him. It was close to midnight when the phone rang. That hour where the world feels heavy and still, and every sound carries a kind of warning. My heart dropped before I even picked up. A mother knows the tone of her child's voice. And Daniel's was one I hadn't heard since he was a boy, shaking. Afraid. Unraveling. I could hear him struggling to breathe as he explained. His words tumbling over each other. Pieces of the story fell into place like shards of glass, money that wasn't his. A deal gone wrong. People demanding repayment. $150,000. The number echoed in my head. Too large to fit inside my world of paychecks and grocery budgets. My body went cold. But my thoughts raced. Fear hit first. Not for the money, for him. The image of my son. Once small enough to fit in my arms. Now trapped in something I couldn't understand. And then came instinct. That part of me that had always acted before fear had a chance to stop me. I didn't ask how he could do something so reckless. I didn't ask why. I just asked how long he had before it was too late. By 7 the next morning, I was at the first bank. The woman behind the counter had kind eyes but spoke in numbers and terms that made my stomach turn. By noon, I was in another branch, signing away the little security I'd spent a lifetime building. My hands trembled as I wrote my name. Each signature carving away a piece of the future I thought I'd finally earned. By closing time, I'd been to 3 banks and 1 credit office. My savings were gone. My home was leveraged. My retirement stripped bare. But I walked out holding cashier's checks that I prayed would be enough to keep my son safe. My chest ached with both pride and shame. I had done what mothers do. I had saved him. When I handed him that money, his relief was immediate. Almost childlike. He hugged me with the same desperation I remembered from scraped knees and broken toys. For a brief moment, I believed that was enough, that love could fix the damage. But that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by loan papers and the faint smell of coffee gone cold, the truth crept in quietly. I thought I was saving his life. I didn't realize I was saving him from learning how to live it. 3 years passed before I even realized how much time had slipped away. Life had fallen into a rhythm I never meant to create. Work, bills, and those monthly payments that came due like clockwork. $350. Every month. Without fail. I could almost hear the sound of it leaving my account before I even pressed submit. Daniel sent a few payments here and there, small ones. Like afterthoughts. Each time, I told myself it was a sign of progress. That he was trying. But deep down, I knew he'd moved on. While he built a life filled with dinners and photographs, I built one out of quiet endurance. I sold the dining table that once held our birthdays. I stopped buying fresh flowers for the kitchen. Even grocery lists got shorter, no extras. No indulgence. Just enough to get by until the next payment came due. Still, I couldn't hate him. Love doesn't dissolve just because it hurts. Some mornings, I'd find myself smiling at old photos of him in his graduation gown. And then I'd remember the balance on my loans, and feel that familiar ache settle behind my ribs. Pride and resentment lived side by side inside me, neither winning. Both exhausting. Nights were the hardest. The apartment was too quiet. And the hum of the fridge seemed louder than it used to be. I'd sit at the table, tracing my finger along the crease of a payment receipt before tucking it carefully into a folder already too full. The paper felt thin. Almost fragile, just like me. I used to think love meant protecting someone. But sometimes, love means paying for someone else's mistakes and pretending you don't mind. 2 weeks before the engagement party, I stood in front of a mirror holding a black dress I couldn't afford. $200 money that should have gone to groceries or the electric bill. But I told myself it was worth it. My son wanted me to look the part. And maybe, if I blended in just enough, he wouldn't feel the need to hide me anymore. That thought alone was enough to make me reach for my credit card. The night of the party glowed with the kind of wealth that doesn't need to announce itself. Chandeliers shimmered. Crystal glasses clinked softly. And everyone moved as if the air itself were made for them. I smiled when people smiled at me. Nodded when they spoke. Careful not to say too much. The room smelled of perfume and champagne, a scent I'd never worn but suddenly wished I had. Then I heard him. My son. His voice. Steady and confident. Carrying across the room. He was talking about our family investments. About his mother's portfolio, and the success she built from real estate. Each word hit me like a small betrayal. Sharp and deliberate. I stood there. Frozen. The truth pressing against my chest, like a secret trying to escape. He wasn't just ashamed of where he came from, he was erasing it. Rewriting our story with me, as a prop in his illusion. I looked around that glittering room. Feeling smaller than I ever had before. The dress. The smile. The effort to belong at all, felt like part of the same lie. Beneath the shimmer and laughter, I could almost hear the sound of something breaking inside me. Money was never the real cost of his deception. The real price was watching him trade truth for approval and losing both of us in the process. The dinner started the way uncomfortable moments always do, slowly. Politely. With everyone pretending nothing was wrong. I sat across from my son. Hands folded neatly in my lap. My napkin perfectly in place. The table shimmered under the glow of soft light. Silverware lined with military precision. The room smelled faintly of wine and roasted meat. But beneath it all was tension thin. Invisible. Stretching tighter with every question that came my way. They asked about my real estate investments. I smiled. Nodding as Daniel filled in the blanks with his well-rehearsed lies. He spoke about portfolios I didn't have. Properties I'd never seen. And a version of me that existed only in his imagination. Each word felt like a layer of glass between us. Clean and polished. but impossible to see through. I kept my voice steady, my posture calm, pretending not to notice the way he avoided my eyes. But then, something shifted. A comment. A laugh that wasn't kind. The moment his pride turned into cruelty. I felt it. He compared me my entire life to another woman sitting just across the table. Elegant and untouchable. He didn't shout. But he didn't have to. The words landed like a slap. My son, the boy I'd raised through hunger and heartbreak, was now ashamed enough to use me as a lesson in what not to be. For a heartbeat. I couldn't move. The air felt too thin. My chest too tight. And then, everything inside me went still. I'd spent my life swallowing pain in silence. But that night, I couldn't anymore. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the polished floor. My voice didn't rise, it didn't need to. I simply told the truth. About the loans. The $150,000. The house I mortgaged. The years I'd spent paying for his mistakes, while he pretended he'd built his life alone. The room froze. Eyes widened. Forks stopped midair. Danielle's face went pale. His perfect facade cracking like thin ice. The silence that followed was absolute, heavy. Holy, almost. And in that stillness, I finally breathed. For the first time in years, I wasn't ashamed. I wasn't protecting anyone. I was simply being honest. And that truth, raw and unpolished, set me free. When the dinner ended, the silence followed me out the door like a shadow. I remember stepping into the night air. The sound of laughter long gone, replaced by the soft hum of traffic, and my own heartbeat. Inside that house, everything I had built for my son, every lie I had allowed him to tell, had finally crumbled. His fiancée's face had gone pale. Her mother's eyes had filled with something that looked like pity. Or maybe understanding. Daniel didn't speak to me as I left. He didn't have to. His anger clung to the air like smoke. In the days that followed, his engagement ended. Jessica walked away. And Daniel called to tell me I'd ruined his life. His words didn't sting the way I thought they would. I didn't feel guilt this time, only a quiet clarity. For years, I'd mistaken protection for love, and silence for kindness. But the truth, as painful as it was, I had finally done what my sacrifices never could. It set both of us free. A week later, I received a message from Jessica's mother, Victoria. She thanked me for my honesty, said she admired it. She even offered me part-time work helping with a small community program she supported. Something steady. Something new. I almost cried reading it. Not from sadness, but from the strange feeling of being seen. Really seen. For the first time in years, that night, I stood by my window, watching the city lights blur in the distance. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small, just quiet, and free enough to imagine what came next. Months passed, and life began to bloom quietly again. I started working with Victoria, and together we built something I never expected. Collins and Thornton Financial Consulting, a small firm dedicated to helping families rebuild after loss and debt. The same lessons that once broke me became the very tools I used to lift others. I understood their fear, their shame, their hope. Each morning, I'd unlock the office and feel sunlight spill across the desks. Warm and golden. The air smelled faintly of coffee and new beginnings. When my first client reached out to shake my hand, I realized I'd finally found peace and purpose. Looking back, I've learned that love isn't about saving someone, it's about knowing when to let them face their own storms. Letting go didn't break me, it set me free. I finally understand that peace comes from truth, not silence. If this story touched you, like, share, and tell me your thoughts below.